Hello everyone. So I'm Lara, the BIMA membership administrator at BIMA, and I also run the masterclasses here at BIMA. I'm very excited to welcome Halima Khan, the HR director from JourneyHR, to host the Building Psychological Safety at Work masterclass for BIMA. There will be an opportunity for a Q&A and poll at the end. Some BIMA events initiatives you might be interested in are the BIMA HR Roundtable on Tuesday, 6th February with Halima again, and the BIMA Leadership and Management Academy in partnership with Impact Futures. I'll put the links in the chat. Take it away, Halima.
Thank you very much, Lara. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. So today, obviously, we're going to be talking about building psychological safety at work. I'm going to talk a little bit about theory. Hopefully, you guys will be, engaging with me in the chat. I'm just interested in hearing kind of some of your ideas and thoughts as we kind of work through this. I know we've got a cross section of people from different businesses, different roles. So it'd just be really interesting to hear kind of how this might apply to you and your context. So yeah, just to introduce myself. So yeah, I'm Halima, or most people call me Hallie. I'm one of the HR directors at JourneyHR. JourneyHR is a consultancy business, a HR consultancy business, and we work with mainly small and medium-sized businesses on kind of all of their HR solutions, problems and needs. And prior to joining Journey, I worked within the WPP advertising network, was there for several years as well. So have worked in very fast-paced environments in the past as well. So today, these are the things I'm going to cover. Like I said, I hope you will all take away something that you can kind of apply to your own business case and scenarios and context. And hopefully you can be kind of inspired by some of the ideas that other people are kind of putting into the chat as well. We're going to obviously talk a lot about psychological safety, why it matters, how you can assess it, leadership's roles, some of the blockers and challenges when you come to implementing your tools to overcome or help promote psychological safety, and start kind of thinking about that action planning as well. Before I kick into it though, I'd love to just hear anyone's kind of definition around psychological safety, because I'll go through that next. So if anyone's got kind of any previous history or a bit of an understanding of what it might be, if you could just pop that in the chat, that would be great. I'll give you guys a second. Is anyone brave enough? Okay, so I'll move on to my definition. Oh, here we go. Okay. Feeling secure and comfortable to speak out about your needs. Yeah. Enabling everyone to feel comfortable bringing their whole selves to work. A place that's safe to speak openly without fear of being judged or for doing so. That's perfect. That last one is really close to my definition. So yeah, psychological safety is an environment that encourages, recognizes and rewards individuals for contributions and ideas by making individuals feel safe when taking risks. A lack of psychological safety at work can inhibit team learning and lead to in-groups and groupthink and blind spots. So psychological safety is a term that's been coined by this professor in Harvard, and it started to become a bit in the kind of like general lingo, especially if you work in HR, you might have heard it quite a few times before. But it's not about a nicey environment where everyone's getting along, which obviously we all aspire to have, but you also want a bit of constructive dissent as well. So where people feel that they can, share potentially conflicting views or take kind of interpersonal risks without feeling like there's going to be any sort of negative consequence of doing that as well. So yeah, today in kind of my career and kind of just working in these sort of fast-paced environments, I think it's been really clear that psychological safety is a catalyst for driving a thriving workplace, and there are tangible business outcomes to creating a psychologically safe workplace. So when employees feel secure, they feel heard and valued, they will bring their absolute full selves to work and their best ideas as well. If organizations don't think psychological safety is important and they neglect it, it just jeopardizes your ability to perform well as a business, because people won't be able to push ideas. They won't kind of have that constructive debate about projects and ideas. But it also jeopardizes some of the metrics, excuse me, upon which some of the people practices and strategies are built. So if you don't have strong psychological safety, you run the risk of almost undermining some of your practices, like your engagement surveys, your retention strategies, your DEI sessions that you might use to educate people, training. Because ultimately, if you don't have the safety where people trust that that those exercises have value and that they will create change, then you'll see lower engagement and response rates, or not genuine responses. And you may also see within your business higher churn, which we all know is a problem as well. So psychological safety is an environment that encourages and recognizes people that, for all their contribution and ideas, and makes people feel safe to take the risks as well. If you're feeling safe to take risks, to speak up and to disagree openly, and surface concerns without negative repercussions or pressure to sugarcoat any bad news, it'll ultimately result in good business outcomes. And it'll create, a lot of the kind of businesses that we're talking to today are, creative businesses. So kind of feeling that people can share those creative ideas without the fear of stepping on other people's toes, is really important as well. And we'll go into talking about leadership and the impact of that. But, to feel like you can share upwards feedback, including negative upward feedback for leaders where improvements can happen, it's can only kind of create those kind of positive changes as well. And ultimately, from a leadership capability perspective, we'll go into this a bit more, but we want it to feel like it's okay to make mistakes, to be vulnerable and speak truth about when things are not kind of going, well. And that's all to do with kind of communication, active listening, and openness as well. McKinsey's done loads of research into this. Would really recommend you guys kind of going through their white paper. It's lengthy. It's really interesting though, if this is a particular, area of interest. But basically, they've done research across all different types of businesses and environments. So medical teams and hospitals to software development teams at big tech. And basically, psychological safety is the #1 predictor of team performance, productivity, quality, safety, creativity, and innovation, which I'm sure are important to all of your businesses. So these are 4 stages of psychological safety, and this was developed by a organizational psychologist called Timothy Clark, Dr. Timothy Clark, and it's about kind of going through each of these stages, and obviously it's like a linear diagram for like a non-linear process. So, but I think each stage has great relevance, especially if you come from a HR background or you've got a particular interest in how people feel within your organization, which I assume that you do if you're kind of signing up to this session. But you have to work through each stage in order to kind of get to a fully psychological safe work environment. So this is just some theory to kind of help you provide some context to what psychological safety could look like. So stage 1 is inclusion safety. So inclusion safety is kind of like satisfying that human need to just basically have this feeling of connection and belonging. It's in this safe stage rather that you feel safe, you feel like you can be yourself, you're accepted for who you are. And that includes all of your unique attributes and defining characteristics. So obviously a big part in that is all the work that most organizations do within the DE&I space. So a kind of indicator of lacking psychological safety may be a lack of disclosure around kind of maybe the metrics that you might be collecting for your data analysis. I think you can really see how this pans out, and I'm not gonna go over why DEI is so important. I think everyone kind of has a general understanding of that. But if you feel very alone, you can feel really disconnected from the rest of the organization. So it's really important to always maintain that effort around that DEI space. And, in more recent times, over the last 3 years, if you don't have inclusion safety and there's situations that maybe happen at a global level, that can really have an impact on individuals within a workplace. and not feeling like they can kind of be open or discuss that with their colleagues, or that there is kind of a parameter for bringing that sort of up in the discussion, I don't think is, it doesn't make people feel safe. And I think that results in kind of disengagement from the workplace as well. So hopefully that one's pretty straightforward. Inclusion, safety, feeling like you belong. Learner safety is then the need to kind of learn, satisfying the need to kind of learn and grow. So in this stage, this is where you feel safe to exchange your learning process. So this is like asking questions, giving and receiving feedback, experimenting, making mistakes. You could really see how this might stifle innovation if you don't have learner safety. So how can people go and learn new skills? How do they develop themselves? Do you allow them the space to create and share and learn? And like a really basic example of that is you can imagine a new joiner, someone who's quite junior potentially, if they don't have the safety or learner safety to make mistakes or to learn or to ask questions, ultimately they're probably going to cause more problems in the long run. So you really want to kind of address that quite promptly. So yeah, we've talked about inclusion safety, now learner safety. And then stage 3 is then contributor safety. So contributor safety is the need to satisfying the need to kind of be able to make a difference. So that's where you feel like you're able to use your skills and your abilities to make a contribution to the workplace. So on a team level, that might be people talking up in their team meetings and sharing some thoughts and ideas about a new project or new idea to kind of take the organization forward. And I would kind of use this as a bit of a kind of call to action in terms of maybe your assessment of psychological safety in your workplace. On a team level, who is speaking up in those meetings? If you kind of sit as part of senior management team meeting, who is doing most of the talking? Do people contribute ideas? Do people feel safe to share their ideas? Do you get kind of a message after the meeting saying, oh, what do you think of blah, 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 blah? And they just didn't share that idea in the meeting. So that would say that this probably isn't contributor safety. And the final stage is challenger safety. So challenger safety is the need to kind of speak up to make things better. And this is what I was kind of talking about, that constructive dissent, but it's more about the debate that might happen to make an idea better. So this is where you feel safe to speak up and to challenge the status quo. When you think there's an opportunity to kind of like change or improve it. It's when you think something's not going to work, you don't agree with it, you think it might not, might not land well. So you're kind of trying to find the right outcome and the right solution through discussion. And you might actually know who those people are. You might be in meetings with them, and they're always kind of the people who just want to tease out the idea a bit more. And it's really quite a fundamental part of a high functioning team. So obviously, you just need to think about how that could affect in various different business contexts, right? So again, if we were thinking about kind of a medical environment, if a nurse was witnessing a doctor, administrating a medication wrong, that can have quite serious consequences if challenger safety doesn't exist. Obviously, I don't think any of us work in those sorts of environments, but obviously you can see how one could go down the garden path too far. And everyone's kind of like, yeah, well, yeah, we never agreed with that idea, but nobody ever challenged it. And that can make for a really kind of difficult situation. So to kind of help people move through the 4 stages and ultimately land in a place where they feel comfortable with risk-taking, challenging, and kind of talking up, it's all about, we're going to talk a lot about the kind of leader's role in kind of creating a sense of psychological safety in the workplace. Hopefully that all makes sense so far and kind of what I've talked through in terms of those stages. But hopefully kind of a bit of an interesting way of kind of looking at psychological safety in those kind of 4 buckets as well. So the next question I have for you guys is, have you ever measured psychological safety in your organization? And how have you done it? And if not, how would you do it? And just really hoping that from this we can kind of learn from one another, get some ideas, to kind of figure out how we even know where we're starting from when it comes to psychological safety. Oh, I don't know about the Project Aristotle stuff. Be really interested in hearing about that. Lovely. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Fine. So it's interesting. It sounds like people haven't measured it in the past. But yes, obviously, I think there's probably some people who've done engagement surveys, pulse surveys, office vibe, yeah, net promoter scores. Yeah. Okay, great. So everyone's interested, I guess, in hearing what kind of their business and people have to say, which is a great place to start. Not all businesses do have the time or the resource or are able to do that as well. Okay, so assessing psychological safety. So obviously I'm going to start with like measurements, obviously good. We want to have data points. We need to kind of figure out where we started from and where we're going to and kind of measuring all in between. But even in this kind of space is psychological safety, even measuring it comes with some dangers because if you take no action on the back of it, it can almost create more harm. So just kind of thinking about the fact that don't do it unless you've kind of got the impetus to kind of take it forward into actions and make sure that it's kind of like any change is kind of catalyzed as a result of doing these surveys and metrics and observations as well. So when measuring psychological safety in your organization, it's really important to be really data-driven, business focused, and take a kind of a really kind of metric approach to this. And the best place to kind of think about is observing and reflecting on your own team's interactions. So this is just on the observation point. And then looking at kind of that top level as well. And depends if you kind of have this access and availability and ability to do it. But some of the points I mentioned already, which is maybe you spot some of the same few people talking in most of the meetings. So why is nobody else speaking up? What's kind of going on there? Again, that kind of example of somebody might privately message you after a meeting. They had a really good idea that they just didn't mention earlier. So why did they feel that that's not accepted in the kind of group context, but of kind of felt like on a one-to-one basis, they're able to kind of get that idea through on an individual basis. Observing or seeing and thinking there could be some groupthink going on. So where one idea is pushed and then it becomes the only idea. So thinking about that, how those kind of meetings play out. And then thinking about how feedback or conflict is kind of dealt with, or what's the kind of vibe in the team. So how do your team speak to each other and to you as well? So after you've done the observation, I think the best way to know is if your employees are afraid of speaking up, is to then just ask them, and through kind of surveys and engagement pulses and whatever you might do, but obviously anonymously, of course. And that could look like various different things. So it could be anonymous suggestion boxes, feedback channels, focus groups. Interviews are all good. Gather qualitative data from kind of employees about their experiences as well. So depending on your role, you might feel that those are actions that you can take yourself, or you might need to get somebody separate to kind of get a kind of a real true feeling of where the business is at as well. And some of the questions that to think about are people on this, on a scale of 1 to 5, people in this team are comfortable challenging each other about their plans and approaches. Members of this team are able to flag problems, even if this does slow down our progress. People on this team won't reject others for thinking differently to them. It's safe to take a risk or propose a weird idea with this team. And I feel comfortable giving people on this team constructive criticism, even if they haven't asked for it. So there's those kind of ideas, I guess, to hopefully kind of spark within your organization as well. I'm going to talk a little bit now about like leadership styles. So on the kind of on the slide here, I've got kind of 2 different forms of leadership style. So there's the traditional and collaborative. I won't read it all out for you, but there's sort of opposite ends of the scale in terms of a management style. And, you know, questions just to ask yourself internally is there a time to take the traditional approach? And is there more you could be doing as a collaborative manager? And what sort of style is rewarded within your organization? And where do you see kind of like, and what on what basis are they being rewarded? Are they being rewarded by team results, or are they being rewarded by high performing, engaged, motivated teams? So just a bit of internal reflection on that as well. But these are two, like I said, two opposite sides of the scale, and there's a variety of different contexts where some of those actions and behaviours may be appropriate and applicable. So on the slide here, I've just got a screen grab from McKinsey's study on psychological safety. As I said, they've done a lot of research into this. And this demonstrates how leadership has an impact, or leadership style has an impact on psychological safety. So leaders can increase the likelihood of team member psychological safety by demonstrating specific behaviours. So with consultative leadership, which has direct and indirect effects on psychological safety, leaders consult their team, solicit input, consider the team's views on issues that might affect them. So they're kind of that more kind of, like I said, consultative sort of leader. When you've got leadership kind of behaving in a certain way, it obviously sets the tone for the team and the team climate. So how they behave, how their actions show up, have a big influence on the overall team psychological safety. So there's a kind of cascade down approach. Moreover, if you create a kind of positive team climate, then you actually get a lot more kind of better outcomes for the business, because they'll be able to kind of be a bit more resilient during change in times of disruption as well. Because if that team feels cohesive and well connected, they'll kind of be able to kind of support each other through it as well. Positive team climate is the most important driver for psychological safety, and most likely to occur when leaders demonstrate supportive, consultative behaviours, and then, you know, use that kind of to kind of like challenge their team in a supportive way. Consultative leaders, which have direct and indirect effects on psychological safety, they kind of input and bring up all the kind of ideas and thoughts from the rest of their team, and kind of use opportunities to kind of surface those. So thinking about what those behaviours might look like, it might involve kind of encouraging everyone to go around a room, talk about something, maybe do kind of a bit of a mop-up session where something's gone wrong. So using kind of mistakes as an opportunity to learn as well. On one side of this diagram, you've also got the challenging leader. So this is when they ask kind of team members to kind of re-examine their assumptions, how they work, could have been done differently. And kind of a challenging leader definitely has its positives. You know, they can, you know, encourage people to express creativity, feeling empowered to make work-related changes. But the best kind of place of psychological safety in this kind of scale of behaviours is when a leader creates a positive team climate through supportive and consultative actions. So again, just kind of going back to that, which is just that traditional versus collaborative. Obviously, the kind of the takeaway is just thinking about collaborative leadership as kind of a core skill set that you kind of want to build within your management and leadership, and kind of taking that forward into this diagram, obviously with the caveat that there are always opportunities and times, particular scenarios when you need to be a bit more directional. So the next question then for you is, how do you get the right leadership behaviours? So this is about what actions could you put in place to get the right leadership behaviours. And again, this is just to kind of hopefully inspire some ideas on how you get there. I'll give you guys a minute to think about it. Brilliant. Leadership metrics, measure, reward the right leadership behaviours. Anonymous team feedback, 360 feedback, agreed. Tailored L&D resources, absolutely, with external experts. Correct. That'd be great. What is a standardized regressive coefficient? Oh, is that from the previous slide? Yeah, developing a feedback culture with authentic communication and emphasis on psychological safety. Yeah, brilliant. Love that. Interdepartmental feedback, solid leadership for managers, regular one-to-ones with their line managers, feedback and guidance. All absolutely, completely and utterly agree. Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, frequent retrospectives. Exactly, perfect. That's almost a bit of like a wash up, I guess, in terms of where you've kind of done a project or something, and kind of looking at what could have been done or changed potentially, good or bad outcomes. So what went well, what didn't go so well. Mutually defined values with examples and frequent feedback. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Russell, I don't technically know the definition of that language. It was just a screen grab from the McKinsey study. But basically what I took from that is kind of how the overall score of psychological safety was affected by the different styles. So the numbers in the bubble were kind of how psychologically safe they felt based on the kind of leadership styles as defined. Brilliant. Okay, so thank you so much. It's always good to get a lot of chat on uh, on the chat. Just because, sometimes it just feels like otherwise I'm just talking the whole time. So it's just really good to hear and see what you guys are doing. Or that you might be thinking about, I guess, in terms of supporting your leadership, getting into the right behaviors. So these are just some qualities, and I feel like you're probably already there with a lot of your suggestions in terms of the qualities of a supportive, collaborative leader who can foster psychological safety. And for the HR professionals in the room, some of these probably feel quite supported, I guess, by some of the systems and practices that probably exist within your organisation already. So it's just about kind of how your role may develop in terms of ensuring leadership are able to access and develop these skills. So people have mentioned coachings and retroactive and kind of maybe getting some experts to kind of talk and do some training. So, making sure that you're able to kind of support leadership and kind of getting to this point would be great, and coaching them through where maybe some of these behaviors aren't always demonstrated. So when I talk about your systems and practices, I'm talking about your code of conduct, employee handbook, your context of the organization, the precedent already set, and thinking about the ground rules that exist for that organization, and the values and overarching mission of the business as well. Lolita, I absolutely agree. Radical Candor is a brilliant book, and I would get your leaders to read it. I don't know kind of where your kind of connection is with them, but did it in one of my previous organizations. We all read the Radical Candor book, and we just used it as an opportunity to talk about feedback and how we give feedback. And actually, I think most people slip into the for those who don't know, Radical Candor's like a 2x2 sort of matrix, where you're talking about the level that you care and the level of directness of that feedback. So obviously you want people to care when they're giving feedback, but sometimes you need it to be direct. And if you care but you're indirect, it can just be a lot of niceness, which doesn't necessarily help people progress. So that's one of the points on here, right? Which is asking for feedback. And so thinking about how that feedback is given. So maybe within your organization, thinking about training people to feel that they can give feedback, even when it's maybe on the more constructive or, developmental side, how they can do it in a really effective way. So to talk about that systems and tools piece, does everyone have the chance to get feedback? So on their performance in the company, so that's your things like appraisals, 360s. Do you have an always on sort of reward and recognition sort of program as well? Um, some people have mentioned one-to-ones and making sure that that happens and making sure that there's kind of check-ins to make sure that these behaviors are kind of happening on an ongoing basis. And leaders often get kind of forgotten about in that sort of process or kind of feel like it's not for them. And I'd really encourage that, there is a framing for them to still get that feedback from people, and that their development is still being considered, and that they're kind of being supported as well. The first point on this is around vulnerability. And I think this is a really powerful behavior that really good leaders have. So vulnerability is kind of like showing that you don't have the answers all the time. And, basically that's an expression of honesty and it's just acknowledging your own mistakes. And I think that's a real powerful example for everybody else, about the value of like openness and honesty as well. Like I said, some of these are really probably quite obvious and quite clear given what we've already covered, i.e. the don't blame and shame. Clearly is a behavior that if it happened, it would omit psychological safety. But you need your leaders to kind of take accountability for themselves and the teams around them. It's not a finger pointing game. I think it's around, we'll talk about kind of collective responsibility in a moment. But if it feels like the responsibility to call out that behavior also only lies with one person, it doesn't make for a successful change in the organization of psychological safety. So there has to be a bit of a stopgap and a bit of a consideration for if that behavior exists within your organization, how you call it out and how you kind of address it, in a really in a way that kind of fosters people's sense of feeling like that's okay, that they might have done something wrong, but that they need to learn. The final point on this is acting with integrity. And I mean, this is just always important, but it's increasingly important. We know that there's generational differences, and the newer generations that are kind of coming into the workforce now hold their leaders to a very high account. And acting with integrity across a variety of scenarios is always going to be held very strongly for leaders, i.e., if there's any sort of indiscretion, they're always going to be held to a higher account than other people. And just making sure that they act with integrity, which also means acting with consistency, is a really valuable skill and behavior to have as well. So, creating psychological safety is, I would just say these are kind of the ways that, behaviors that everyone can kind of embrace, which is, again, is to that point about radical candor, about that scale of caring, is to show that you care about people, both personally and professionally. It's to understand any challenges that come up and avoid blame and kind of work through a scenario or a problem to kind of come up to a different solution. It's for everyone to kind of build self-awareness and demand the same from your kind of senior leaders as well. And again, another tool to think about that is some psychometrics or behavioral stuff. Nipping negativity in the bud, where kind of those negative behaviors start to creep. It's important to address those promptly and then not allow that to become the norm. Including your team within decision making and making sure that you create opportunities for feedback as well. So that's just a bit of recap of what we've talked about so far. There are challenges and obstacles to creating psychological safety. So, I think there's so many environments and, so many contexts, I guess, in terms of where psychological safety can show up and where you think that you might have a psychologically safer organization, but then something happens that makes you kind of doubt that that might be the case. So an example that I read about was Boeing, the airline or airplane kind of I can't think the word, manufacturer. Um, and they basically had this kind of new project that they were going to release, and it was, really exciting. It was kind of an engineering sort of task, and if Boeing pulled it off, it would be amazing, right? That's how excited they were to kind of talk to all the engineers about this new project that they were going to be developing. And when the business leader announced it to the team of engineers, and he said, "Does anyone have any questions?" There was complete silence in the response, and almost the silence sent a strong message. And so the way that that leader then took that forward in terms of figuring out what had happened, was that they engaged with people on kind of an individual sort of basis to kind of understand what had happened and like what people were thinking about this project. And he realized that people were really anxious about the project, the requirements, the ask. It all sounded very daunting and overwhelming. And I think it's almost that it's the first point on this slide is that a key challenge is to think that there's a HR problem, and it's not a HR problem. It's kind of like an everyone problem. It's a problem that requires collective effort if there is psychological unsafety, but it requires collective effort that starts with leadership because they set the tone, but it's something that needs to be constantly reviewed and monitored. And change is always difficult if you're going to kind of go through a process of where you've been and the behaviors that were once acceptable to move into a place where they're no longer acceptable. That has pains within it. So there is always going to be a level of discomfort as well. And yeah, so it's important for the role of leaders and managers to promote psychological safety. But yeah, they're not the only ones. Creating psychologically safe workplaces involves everybody, every team member. And, it's about when somebody does make a comment, an idea, a suggestion, a challenge, that they feel supported in order to be able to do that. And that's when we just need to be able to kind of, make sure that there's those sorts of behaviours, if they're not being allowed or being stifled, that kind of gets called out as well. I'm going to redress the misinterpretation of psychological safety in a moment. I'm going to circle back to that. But key challenges and obstacles is obviously the first point, which is talking about the power dynamics that exist within a lot of the kind of work relationships. So I'm sure you can all probably think of a time that maybe power dynamics might have played a part in kind of interactions. So leaders just need to be really aware of their influence and actively try and create space where people can contribute. So encouraging participation from everyone, regardless of their position or seniority or whatever it might be. And that's creating a culture where everyone has ideas and all their ideas are valued and respected. So going back to that example of like a senior management meeting where maybe the CEO is the only person to speak, thinking about why that might be. Why do people not feel like they can speak up? Does that CEO need to take proactive action in terms of that senior management team, in terms of how that meeting runs? Does everyone have to have like an agenda point? Is it kind of each person takes turns in terms of who's running each leadership meeting, depending on the frequency of those leadership meetings and how viable that is? But just thinking about that kind of power dynamics, and so leaders kind of taking an active interest in how they might be influencing the room. Building trust takes time. So that's pretty obvious, I think, actually. But if you've got a place where trust is broken, between maybe employees and senior management, it takes a long time to kind of rebuild that. And that's really crucial for psychological safety. So again, in the example of like you might have gone through a business with really challenging times, and they've kind of, maybe you've had to do significant redundancies or something like that, and the process didn't feel fair. Like for some reason there's this disconnect. People will be anxious about their job security. And that has to be something that you have to think about when you're kind of making big changes and communicating changes, because that safety, which is built on trust, is all around how the leaders kind of demonstrate their integrity, which we kind of talked about a moment ago. Um, so thinking about how you can rebuild those trusts, whether that's team building exercises, bonding activities, mentoring, partnerships, whatever they might be, but thinking about how you can lead from example and demonstrate trustworthiness by keeping up your commitments, and being transparent and supporting team members. And then the last point is psychological safety champions. It might not be appropriate for your organisation. I said right at the beginning, you might know who these people are. These are the people who are just like natural advocates for psychological safety. They jump in, said, sorry, so and so was just finishing their point, do you mind just stopping there? Or they might be the person who kind of like actively challenges within the kind of the team meeting. So they might be the people that you kind of embrace and kind of utilize their kind of skills and ideas in terms of how you can kind of create a more positive work environment. So it's just something to think about. Sometimes these people are they just exist within your organization. Depends on tenure, I think, as well. Some people who've been in an organization for a little bit longer might feel a little bit more psychologically safe than people who've been there for a smaller amount of time. But only through doing those observations and interviews and finding out how people feel, you might be able to understand where maybe this psychological insafety may be growing from in the first place. But yeah, so addressing all of this, embracing aspects like diversity, being really clear on your what you stand for as an organization, addressing conflicts, building trust, helps to all build psychological safety as well. And then the misunderstanding psychological safety. So I haven't actually got the definition of the misunderstanding, but I think what has become widely misunderstood about psychological safety is that it equates to like a comfortable and like risk-free environment. So where people are really in their comfort zone, they feel really safe. Yeah, it's kind of cozy, but it can be quite limiting. So when employees operate in their comfort zone, they kind of miss out on the opportunity to like develop new skills, embrace different perspectives, overcome obstacles. It means that maybe you might also, as an organization, not be pushing forward into the next level, in terms of kind of what your organization has the potential to do. And like a really good example of like psychological safety or how it kind of plays out in an organizational kind of context is AI, artificial intelligence. So we all know AI is coming, it's here, it's redefining how we work, and there's a lot of uncertainty that comes with that. So like I think 50% of people think AI might affect their job, basically. So that's quite unsettling. But if you have a work culture that goes, we're psychologically safe, so let's figure out how AI could play to our advantage. That's a good reflection of psychological safety. If your organization goes, AI is a threat, then that is, and it's going to replace us, that does not provide psychological safety. I hope that I hope I've made sense for that example. But I think that would be really interesting as well for you guys to explore. So sustaining psychological safety is embracing kind of continuous improvement. So encouraging a culture of continuous improvement, of learning and growth, regularly assessing the team's dynamics, communications, collaboration processes, how you kind of get feedback from team members and actively work on addressing areas of improvement. All of those kind of with the team, and in a collaborative sort of way helps foster psychological safety. Feedback culture, I think it's it's probably been in the lingo for about 10 years, maybe more. Many companies aspire to it, but it's basically creating an environment where you give and receive feedback and it's just openly encouraged and valued. Hopefully, if you kind of have hit that kind of point of feedback culture, you're not just waiting for that once a year appraisal or 360, but you're encouraging people to give feedback all the time. And it's done in a really good, strong way. So as in the way that people feel like they're able to give it in a respectful, supportive manner that's very constructive, that creates difference for people too. The next one I think is really interesting, and I think, I'd like to think a lot of people do that, but it's sometimes hard depending on what the mistake is. But always think of mistakes as learning opportunities. So think of that any mistake that happens as a opportunity to take it as a point of growth and learning. So what can we learn from that mistake? And people can make mistakes, not encouraged to make mistakes, but when something's happened, they feel that they're able to own up to it, they take accountability for it, they try and find ways to avoid that mistake. You as a leader might kind of look at it and kind of think, right, what new approaches do we need to take in order to avoid this mistake happening again, and kind of allowing for that innovation to happen within your kind of working ways as well. And the last one is kind of encouraging psychologically safe rituals. Or psychological safety rituals. So thinking about practices and rituals that promote psychological safety within your team. So we've talked about some of these before, but might be kind of creating a mic moment for each member of the team to kind of share their ideas and feedback. And how do you kind of honor those? That creates place for people to have feedback. Some of you talked about regular pulse surveys. Great. How do you respond to those? Make sure that's a ritual that kind of happens, that there's that dialogue that's going on between feedback and the response from the organization as well. So just kind of thinking about those as general practices. So these are just kind of some bullet points, I guess, for action planning. But, we've talked about kind of developing your leaders. I would think about, I think someone's mentioned it before, but the role model behaviors that you want to see across your business, that start with your leadership team. Think about the behaviors that are actively rewarded and encouraged within your leadership group. Think about maybe some of the training requirements that might be required for your leaders, and things like coaching is a really good way of kind of accessing leaders' kind of emotional intelligence, especially when it comes to trying to create that collaborative leader that we see is fundamental to kind of driving psychological safety. Creating ground rules is just around that kind of integrity piece and how you treat one another. So this is slightly more than a code of conduct. This is kind of your values, your behaviors, what you stand for, what you think is appropriate and inappropriate. And then if this is going to be a big project for your organization, that you have identified that there might be a challenge with psychological safety, the activity and communication around it is all going to be really important. So making sure that change agents don't happen in a vacuum. So depending on how directly you want to address it in the first place, but making sure that actions are well communicated across different platforms, and that you're kind of making sure that there's that activity is being seen and heard by everyone, so that the trust is being built across different levels within your organization as well. Encourage kind of open discussion and collect data, share data, and act on the data. And how you do that could be through the observation, interviews, engagement surveys, potentially bringing somebody else in if you feel like you're not in a position to be able to do that autonomously as well. And the final point I just really want to make is a team is only as safe as its least safe team member. It's just a bit of a play on your classic saying. But, new team members might not feel as psychologically safe as those who've been around for a while. If you regularly monitor, you understand how your team's feeling, you take steps to make them feel more safe, then hopefully people will be able to bring their whole selves to work and ultimately create a thriving organization where people are able to grow and push the ideas forward within your company. All of this is kind of, like I said, it's all come from a Harvard professor, so the term psychological safety. The professor is called Amy Edmondson. I'd really recommend her TEDx webinar, YouTube video. It's brilliant. She talks about it in great detail. But I hope, from today and from our time together, that you can take away that, from my perspective, definitely, and I hope I've convinced you the same, that psychological safety is really important from a business perspective, from a innovation, productivity, performance perspective, that psychological safety has an impact on your team. So that would, affect your that would affect your team, that would affect your how people feel engaged within your organization, retention rates. There is significant negatives for lacking psychological safety, that people feel more stressed, that they make poor decisions, that kind of ideas aren't properly teased out. And that leadership has a really important role in creating psychological safety and kind of starting with that cascade approach. And as like I said, I know there's a cross section of people who are in the room, but HR and leadership professionals, just kind of realizing that sometimes some active intervention might be required in terms of kind of making your organization a psychologically safe place to work. So thank you so much for your time today. I think there are some questions and answers. And thank you, Claire. I won't open the link, but I'm pretty sure that's the right one. So Amy Edmondson, TEDx. I don't know what the title of it is called. It's probably called Psychological Safety. And let me just double check the Q&As. Yes, I can share the McKinsey white paper, of course, about how to scale psychological safety. Yeah, so how you scale it, I guess. It's interesting because I think there are obviously growing pains when you have an organization, especially as it grows, between, like you say, a single size sort of business from a double figures and then from that to 50, 100 people. I think the key kind of things to think about are the core behaviors that you have within your organization. So what I mean by that is making sure that as you grow, that those sort of behaviors are recognized and retained and they're not kind of lost. So thinking about those kind of making sure that those are clearly articulated when it comes to your recruitment, how you kind of reward and recognize people as they kind of grow within the organization as well. So as you bring in new management, new leadership, that you have got a set of standards, basically. I hope that helps, Lolita. Russell, where does psychological safety and mental health overlap? It overlaps quite significantly. Basically, if you don't have psychological safety, it can cause additional stress and burnout. So sorry, I'm just going to try and close some of the other boxes. It causes additional stress and burnout. So where you don't feel psychologically safe, you can feel like you're not able to kind of bring your full self to work. You can feel like you're not able to respond or kind of talk to clients or your business leaders about particular issues. And that can result in stress and burnout and worry. And there is a huge overlap. And actually, to foster a psychologically safe workplace, you will see that people feel a lot more positive within an organization and they'll feel a lot more engaged because it's hitting those kind of those core human requirements of like feeling like you can make an impact, feeling like you've got control over your input. So they're kind of intrinsically linked, but it's within mental health in the workplace, basically. Any more questions? I hope that answered your two questions, Lita and Russell. Cool. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for coming. Like I said, I work for an organization called JourneyHR. We do lots of stuff in the HR space. If it's of interest to you, or if you want to kind of reach out and have a bit more of a chat, please do. I'd love to hear from you, and also just like happy to talk about psychological safety. I find it really interesting. It's yeah, like I said, a personal interest of mine. So just to brainstorm and talk about it a bit more, I just would love to hear anything else. And Nikki, yes, I will be sharing my slides, and I think there's a recording of the webinar that's going to be shared as well. And I'll make sure that some of the links that you've all requested, I'll share them with Lara before she kind of sends a follow-up email to this session. Thank you very much, everybody. All right, have a good day.